On Friday, July 31st, 2015, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office performed a welfare check at the Deerfield Drive home in Pensacola, Florida, where Donald Wayne Hartung's half-brothers Richard Smith, John Smith, and their mother Von Sil Smith lived together. Hartung did not live with his brothers and mother. He lived a few houses away, but made weekly visits every Tuesday to cook dinner for his mother. The welfare check was requested after Richard Smith, Donald Hartung's brother, and an employee of the Department of Homeland Security stopped showing up to work after a coworker became concerned about his unexplained absence over a few days, which was not like him, especially considering he had a high-level security position at the Naval Air Base in Pensacola, working in cryptics for the Navy, which he assisted in cracking codes. The last time Richard was at work was 3 days earlier, on Tuesday, July 28th, and the last time Donald Hartung had visited his mother's home to cook dinner, like he always did on Tuesdays. He did this every week. It would also be the last time he would see his family alive. After the welfare check, deputies found the slaughtered bodies of all three people inside the home. Richard Smith had been shot in the head and stabbed in the throat. John Smith was found sitting in a chair in front of a television with a stab wound to his throat and wounds on the top of his head, indicating an attack from behind resulting in blunt force trauma, most likely from a hammer. Blood trails led investigators to believe Von Sil Smith's body had been dragged between rooms. She was found beaten in the head and her throat had been slashed. All three victims were covered up with blankets and clothing. At the time of the investigation, Escambia County Sheriff David Morgan said that the slayings may have been ritualistic and linked to the recent rising of a blue moon. A blue moon defined is when in 1 month, 2 full moons occur and only happen on occasion, about every 2 or 3 years, making it a rare event. The popular phrase for once in a blue moon is where this comes from as well, when someone uses it to describe something that doesn't happen a lot. Morgan is also quoted as saying that on that particular Tuesday in 2015, they were ritualistic killings coinciding with a blue moon, making national headlines and sparking interest more in the type of killings than the truth, that this was just a tragic incident where a mother and her 2 sons were viciously attacked and brutally murdered in their home that simply had nothing to do with anything supernatural. But at the time, some non-important facts discovered that coincided with the murders and not the moon were improperly inserted into part of this case by the sheriff that nearly left out the real focus, which could have derailed the entire investigation. However, as the investigation progressed, the prosecution concluded that financial gain was most likely the best theory behind the motivation of the murders, having nothing to do with what Sheriff Morgan called witchcraft.
Initial research has led us to believe that there is a potential that it was a ritualistic killing. Blunt force trauma, slit throats, positions of bodies, and then our personal interest has some ties to a faith and or religion. Those of you that follow any of that will also note that the time of death, we believe, on Tuesday also coincides with what's referred to as a blue moon. It's witchcraft. I'll say that right now.
After learning that his family was dead, Hartung was then brought in for questioning because he was the last to see them alive. It was there that investigators told him that his family had been murdered. He just claimed he knew that they were dead, not murdered. And after that, he had lots of questions of how they were murdered. After he gave investigators permission to search his home, The Wicca and the occult type stuff that was found in his home made him a prime suspect along with an eyewitness, his neighbor, which I will get into later. Because of the items found in his home, it was a leap to conclusion by investigators that this was a ritualistic killing caused by a pagan belief system. Sheriff Morgan and investigators believe that this witchcraft ritual coincided with the blue moon and the position of the victims' bodies, including covering them up to keep them warm as part of what Wiccans use in human sacrifices. Even if, let's just say that Hartung suffered from mental issues and did ritually kill his family, it isn't important to the case of how and why he really killed them. It has nothing to do with any pagan religion or act. It has to do with someone who was scorned about being excluded from the family will, and the real truth that this killing was done to completely annihilate a family in order to inherit wealth, and in order to inherit that wealth, the only way, they all had to die. Money was the primary and only motivating factor in this case. The crime scene photos, which are very brutal and bloody, appear to be the acts of an angry, disgruntled, and disinherited man who thought he could get away with murdering his family and going with life, business as usual, while inheriting the money he could have never had his family gone on to live. So why were they covered up with blankets? Most likely, since they were family, he covered them up so he didn't have to look at what he did. Once he began to try and clean up the scene, which took a little time, he probably cooled down a bit and reality set in. After all, he did know these people, but when questioned by police, he was sticking to his story that he was not involved. He even attended his slain family's funeral. People have done stranger things. One of Hartung's co-workers recalled that Hartung had once commented that if his mother ever died, as the eldest son, he would inherit the sum of her wealth. But when investigators later interviewed his mother's attorney, they learned Hartung had been excluded from his mother's will. His mother's attorney was quoted as saying, "There are no living survivors of the Smith family other than Hartung, making him the potential sole heir to the victim's estate in this case." 63-year-old Donald Wayne Hartung, who was the older half-brother and son of Von Sil, became more suspect when a neighbor, George Chittenden, who often saw Hartung every Tuesday because that was the day of the week every week he would go to his mother's house to cook, saw Hartung arrive to the home, only usually by the time Richard arrived home from work, Hartung would normally leave before Richard got home because it was believed the two brothers did not get along. But on that particular Tuesday, the neighbor remembers seeing Hartung arrive at his mother's home as usual, and he also remembers seeing Richard arrive at home while Hartung's car was in the driveway, indicating he was still at the residence, something he claims was different because Hartung was usually long gone by the time his brother got home from work. The neighbor, who refers to Richard as RT, probably what everybody called him, even Hartung himself when he was being interrogated by police calls him RT. The neighbor remembers seeing Hartung leave later than usual that evening, but that when he pulled out of the driveway, his headlamps were off.
Did you see RT that day on the 28th before or after you saw Donald Hartung leave the residence?
It was before Mr. Hartung left the residence. I actually saw RT leave for work. My dressing room looks out onto their driveway. But then, like I said, early afternoon, I saw Mr. Hartung arrive, and then later on, I saw RT come home, and then I saw Mr. Hartung leave.
Now, was it normal or abnormal to see RT come home while Hartung was still in the house?
It was not usual. Usually, Mr. Hartung was gone before RT came home.
After that, no one heard from Von Sil, Richard, or John for a couple of days. That is until that co-worker of Richard's noticed he had not reported to work, which was very unusual because he rarely missed work and Richard had an important job. The co-worker called the police, who performed a welfare check on the following Friday, in which they found all three dead inside the home. Richard was still wearing the same clothes he had worn to work on that Tuesday when they found him dead on Friday, suggesting that they were all killed that Tuesday when Hartung had been visiting the home. With the information that the neighbor told police upon finding the bodies, they immediately went to Hartung's house, where they found a ritualistic altar, a pentagram drawn on the floor, and a Ouija board. The investigation immediately jumped to conclusions that Hartung, who denied any involvement in the murders and pled not guilty at his trial, that he was a practicing witch in the Wiccan religion, and without researching any facts about this practice, investigators fabricated a story and believed that it was called a blue moon ritualistic style killing performed by Wiccans, something they claimed without really knowing what they were even talking about or ever researching one fact about the Wiccan religion. Many believe that this was a ploy to sensationalize the case because Sheriff Morgan, the one pushing the issue as a motive for murder, was up for re-election, and that this case would make him even more popular in hopes he would get re-elected. Murder investigations are supposed to look at the facts of a case to back up a motive, but it started to seem like something out of a fictional horror movie instigated by the sheriff to steer the investigation into the supernatural, rather than go by the actual evidence, in which there was enough of that to sustain an open and shut case. Susie Raindove Smith, a Wiccan high priestess, was infuriated at these accusations, calling it insane at the comments made by Sheriff Morgan that Wiccans perform ritualistic killings. She stated that human sacrifice doesn't exist in any form in the Wiccan faith. Wicca is very similar to voodoo in that if you put good into the world, good will come back to you. Smith was very upset that the investigators and sheriff's department did not research one fact about the Wiccan belief system and instead assumed it was some type of devil-worshipping occult. In the South, which is the Bible Belt of the country, if you do not go to church and practice alternate pagan belief systems like Wicca, to some people, it automatically means you are involved in something evil, something Sheriff Morgan probably knew, and that most people would believe when he announced the false negativities of this belief system. Wiccans do call themselves witches, but again, here in the South, if one is called a witch, then the stereotypes of witches being evil are going to make someone look like they engage in evil practices, like ritualistic murder. Susie Smith said it is completely opposite of that and ludicrous, and that what they practice is to put positivity out in the world. It's about peace, not chaos. Morgan was making headline statements with these bogus accusations about the Wiccans, but prosecutor Bridget Jensen saw right through all Morgan's hocus-pocus claims and was not about to use this in the trial to get a conviction. She was determined to stay the course and focus on the actual facts rather than bring up any sensationalism that could possibly jeopardize the case. This was just one man pissed off at the fact he was removed from a will, and that if he took care of the problem himself, something he never admitted to doing, he would be the sole heir and get all the money. Basically, this was all Jensen had to prove to get a conviction, and the evidence collected in this investigation was all she needed to guarantee this would be the outcome. When Hartung was being interrogated by investigators, they told him, without even researching the subject, that Wiccans use the blue moon to perform ritualistic killings, which was obviously made up. And because he professed to being a Wiccan, he had to be the one who killed his family. While it is true that they proved in court he killed his family, the theory investigators presented was later debunked.
Ouija board and some stuff in your house. I do have a Ouija board. Are you teaching religion? Yeah, I'm a Wiccan. I've been a Wiccan for about 3 years. It's a pagan religion. It's based on nature. Does it have to do with like wind phases and stuff like that? It has a lot to do with wind phases. That Wiccan stuff, and these ceremonies or whatever you do you have anything like sacrifices or anything?
No, there's no sacrifice.
When there's two full moons, sometimes they'll offer sacrifice. Yeah. Well, I don't offer sacrifices ever. What kind of person do you think you're facing with something like that? A maniac. Somebody that's out of their mind, crazy.
Could you imagine if the prosecution went along with these ridiculous theories? Thankfully, they were smart enough to go by the actual facts, and although they knew the case was circumstantial, it was a strong circumstantial case.
Tuesday, July 28th of 2015, you will see that this family was brutally and violently murdered by this defendant.
Had they used the investigation's theory of ritualistic killings as the primary evidence in the case, this man most likely would have walked free, inherited his family's money, and 3 people's murders would have received no justice. The truth of the matter is that this case was about money. Hartung had been excluded from his mother's will, and the theory of the prosecution was that if all 3 of his family members were dead, he would be the sole person to inherit any money the family had. A jailhouse informant, Marlon Purifoy, claims Hartung confessed to him that he killed his family because he wanted the money and that he had been excluded from the family will. He also said that he had been planning and thinking about it a few years before, even telling Purifoy that engaging in activities like playing the Ouija board was what made him come to his decision. Purifoy also testified to what he claims Hartung had told him in detail, that before he killed his mother, he tortured her in order to get the combination to the safe by cutting off her pinky finger. Investigators corroborated this in saying that they knew her finger had been cut. However, they were not sure as to why, and that at the scene, the safe was indeed found open, and that after hearing this, that it made sense. There is no possible way the informant could have access to this information without it being told to him by the person who committed these acts.
He went to his mother, then he tortured her so she can tell the combination for the safes and stuff.
He said he tortured her, I'm sorry?
He tortured her.
How?
He cut off her left pinky finger so he can tell the combination for the safes and stuff.
Now, did Mr. Hartung start talking to you about this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you and Mr. Hartung would have these conversations, was anyone else around?
No, ma'am.
Did he tell you anything about what his relationship was like with his mother?
He said he hated his mother because of the way she treated him. She treated him different from the other boys.
Did he say why?
And they had different daddies.
Any other reasons he was upset with his mom?
Yeah, and she left him out the will. That really made him mad, he said.
Now, did there come a time when Mr. Hartung talked about the murder of his family?
Yeah, he told me.
Okay. And did he tell you who killed his mother and 2 brothers?
He said he killed them.
Did he tell you why?
He said he wanted the money because she left him out the will.
While Hartung admitted to police that he was a sole practitioner of the Wiccan religion, and because these killings happened during what is known as a blue moon, which is a rare occurrence when 2 full moons occur in the same month, it is also widely known by most people what a blue moon actually is, which is just basic science, not an indication of Wiccans to perform ritualistic killings. Nonetheless, again without any knowledge of the Wiccan practice, police just assumed that these killings had to do with Hartung's ritualistic style killings, when in reality, Hartung was just mad about being excluded from the will. At his trial, the defense tried to say that in the will, it names a Donald Hartung Jr. as being excluded from the will. Hartung Jr. is Donald's son, but in reality, a will doesn't have to name anyone in order to be excluded. If someone isn't named, meaning included in a will, that automatically excludes them from that will. It was pretty clear that the defense was grasping at straws. The defense also tried other tactics to get an acquittal, calling the investigation sloppy and using the fact that corruption had taken place during this time because one person from the department, a crime technician, whose job entailed collecting DNA from the crime scene, had since stolen drugs from a crime evidence room. She lost her job and was facing up to 170 years in prison, and another person involved in the investigation, the state's medical examiner, a forensic pathologist who had performed the autopsies on the victims to determine how they died, had resigned after allegations that she had misused state money. Regardless, these two incidents didn't change the facts of the case and the evidence collected. And the defense also attacked the state's witness, jailhouse informant Marlon Purifoy, who had previously been convicted of a crime of dishonesty, an incident which did not involve this case, as a tactic to try and convince the jury that he was an unbelievable witness and that informants are con men often looking to get their sentences cut short. That may be true, whether they are lying or telling the truth, but Purifoy knew things that could not have been a lie or even a good guess because the facts that he knew could have only been disclosed to him by the killer. Even with these corrupt cases being exposed, it did not negate the fact that the evidence found and collected against Hartung was very damning. In the end, the case of the defense didn't stand a chance for winning. The neighbor's testimony that he had seen Hartung at the home on Deerfield Drive that Tuesday, then saw him leave later on that evening, driving away with his headlights off while all three, including Hartung, were at the home, then later noticing the three victims seemed to drop off the face of the earth afterwards. In addition to the co-worker of Richard Smith wondering why he hadn't shown or called in sick, prompting him to call police for a welfare check, was the start to cracking this case. The circumstantial evidence in this case was strong. Between the neighbor's testimony, the fact that when the victims were found that Richard was still wearing the same work clothes he wore to work that previous Tuesday when found dead on Friday, which the CCTV footage from his workplace shows, and the jailhouse informant who claims Hartung told him he had killed his family for the money because he was excluded from the will, something that informant could have not known unless it was told to him by the killer. That information alone highly suggested who and why this murder of three people had occurred. During the trial, the defense did come up with one theory that worried the prosecution, and that was the challenge of the time of death. The bodies had been discovered on Friday the 31st, and investigators concluded the killings had to take place on Tuesday the 28th, the last time the victims were seen alive. If it could not be proven that the murders took place on that exact date, the same day the neighbor witnessed Hartung arriving and leaving, later than usual, then this is the one chance the defense had for an acquittal. However, because of that CCTV footage on that Tuesday of Richard arriving and leaving work, the last time his co-workers or his neighbor would see him alive, when he was dead on that following Friday, he was still wearing the same clothing he had worn to work that previous Tuesday, the last time anyone ever saw or heard from him again. A defense medical expert, Dr. Jonathan Arden, testified that the victims could not have been killed on the date the prosecution said, based on their body heat and rigor mortis levels, and claimed they were killed no sooner than Wednesday, the 29th. So time of death became important in this case, which prosecutors realized this became a serious challenge and a possibility that this could create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. Because this case was nearly 100% circumstantial, this one piece of scientific evidence of the victims possibly being killed on that Wednesday was a little nerve-wracking, to say the least, for the prosecution. On the day of closing arguments, the best evidence the prosecution had was the CCTV footage of Richard wearing the same clothes that he wore on Tuesday at work and that he was found wearing at home on Friday, the day he was found murdered. The prosecution argued that because he was wearing the exact same thing the day he was found dead, that he had to be murdered on that Tuesday, the day he got home from work, the same day the neighbor witnessed and testified to that both Hartung and Richard were at their mother's house at the same time, and along with all the other DNA evidence and witness testimony, that they had made a strong enough case and that was enough for the jury to believe there couldn't have been anyone else to have committed these acts but Donald Hartung. Also, something important to the case was that during Hartung's interrogation, he admitted to investigators that he never touched anything of Richard's and that he hardly ever saw Richard, even stating that it had been a couple of weeks since he had even seen him, which is in contradiction to what the neighbor said, that he had in fact seen Hartung at the house that Tuesday when Richard was also present. But the hardest evidence they had against Hartung is that the DNA was found on several items of Richard's, including a checkbook, a notebook or binder of some sort, and the smoking gun. Of all circumstantial evidence, Hartung's DNA was found on the inside of the belt on his dead brother's body. So, if Hartung claimed he never touched anything of his brother Ortiz, how did his DNA find its way on the underside of his brother's belt? Not to mention, he also told them he hadn't seen his brother in weeks. Then, investigators found another key piece of evidence, this final piece that most likely got him arrested and tried for, a cigarette butt, which contained the DNA of Hartung, found in the garbage on top of some bloody towels, items used in an attempted cleanup, which had belonged to the killer. The prosecution focuses on that cigarette butt, where Prosecutor Jensen quotes, "Why so much focus on the cigarette butt in the trash? Because it's bad for them. It is beyond a reasonable doubt bad for them, and the whole point is that it shouldn't be there. It is smack dab in the middle of cooking and murder." Hartung's DNA was found on several items in relation to the killings, and if he claimed he never touched anything belonging to his brother Richard, someone he hadn't seen in weeks, a claim also disputed by the neighbor, then how did it get there? By Hartung himself, because he was there at the time the killings took place and he killed his family. That's how. And yes, because he was related to his victims and often visited the home every Tuesday, of course his DNA could be in the home at any given time. But it's his own claims about never touching anything of his brother's and where his DNA was found in relation to the crimes, including the circumstances in which there was an eyewitness and a jailhouse informant who provided details told to him by Hartung what his motive was for killing his family, which was simple. It was money. All of this made him the prime suspect, and the evidence that indicated him for murder put him on trial, where it was proven in a court of law that found him guilty. Donald Wayne Hartung was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his brothers and mother in February of 2020, and is serving out his sentence at Graceville Correctional Facility in Jackson County, Florida, for the remainder of his life. Initially, this was being tried as a death penalty case, but it's believed that since he was 63 at the time of his conviction, the jury didn't see the point. Perhaps they thought death for an older man was not enough justice for the triple slaying of his family, and that by having to rot in prison for the rest of his life was a more appropriate punishment.
Okay, here is the house that Donald Hartung killed his family, his mother and his two brothers in 2015. At the time, the sheriff's department wanted to make out that this was a ritualistic witchcraft killing, when in reality, as I explained in my video, that the true motivation behind these murders was because of money. So right in there, it looks like other people live here now and have probably fixed the house up. But this is where the murderers, Bonsil Smith, John Smith, and Richard Smith were murdered in 2015. Now, somewhere around here is where Donald Hartung himself lived. He didn't live but a few houses away, and I'm not sure if I can find his house, but we're gonna try. This is the home where Donald Hartung lived just a few houses down from his mother's house. So this is where the murderer lived. He committed the acts in 2015. He was just tried last year in 2020, where he was given life imprisonment for the deaths of his mother and his 2 brothers. And this is his house, or it was his house.
For a more in-depth look into this case, I recommend to watch the documentary presented on Hulu's Killer Cases, Murder Under a Blue Moon, Season 1, Episode 2.
Okay, while we were down here on location finding the Hartung murder house, we saw this. Happy Halloween, everybody! This witch was having a bad day.